Tortured Poets isn't too long. You're just dumb, period. The more I encountered this rhetoric, the more I really think that that is the case. I have the Katy Cats going to war for 143 in my comment section, calling it the tortured flop department. I really truly think that collectively the average pop fan's brain is no longer wired to receive the kind of complexity that exists on TTPD. It is an album that demands your attention, rejects easy interpretation, and deliberately ducks and dives around corners to make you work for it. It's not for everyone, I'll give you that, but it is one of the most astonishing works in Taylor Swift's discography, and in today's video, I'm going to deliver a sermon as to why that is. You may recall that one of my own criticisms of the Tortured Poets department was its length at first, but I've come to view it as really one of its strengths, and here's how I arrived at that conclusion. It was somewhere around my 300th spin of Guilty as Sin that I realized the Tortured Poets department is the greatest album ever made. I'm only half kidding. The Red comparisons were something that I shrugged off at first, nostalgia bias, of course, but as I played this record over and over, and particularly as I gave the anthology a closer look, I realized that Tortured Poets is the contemporary version of Red. In fact, it goes a step further than Red did during the time of its release and before we got the vault tracks. It's messier, it's more embarrassing, somehow rawer and more lopsided in a kind of deliberate way that enhances the flavor of the experience had by its narrator, temporary insanity, triggered by resentment-rotted galaxies of stars that never aligned. I also have a favor to ask of you today. If you want to see Evolution of a Snake, my Taylor Swift podcast, live on tour in the United States in 2025, we are in the final stages of planning out our logistics for the tour, and we need to know where you want to see us. So I've linked a forum down below. Please go and click that link and fill it out and let us know where you'd be most likely to see us. Please just pick one city. The very muchness of it all, I think, served as an optical illusion of sorts. The tongue-tying verboseness of this album, the sheer density of 31 songs, clocking in at almost a 2-hour listening experience, scared off those who were not equipped to grasp its extremities. I believe Taylor Swift intentionally created this record for her most devoted and loyal fans. Perhaps not intentionally during the writing process, but certainly during the molding of the track list and the album's release. Lest we forget that we are in the era's era, where anything goes, and if you don't get it, well, no one really cares, because there are millions of people who do. When Taylor Swift stops playing to a broad audience, as in the casual listener who is not mining her back catalog for clues on how to understand her new work, she is in fact doubling down on the very essence of what draws her most devoted fans towards her, an intricate, self-referential world-making where she is the judge, jury, and executioner. She has ultimate control over her story in this domain, making her feel safe enough to bare her soul in a way she never has before. Ever since she embarked on a journey to own her master recordings, Taylor has stepped more confidently into this current version of herself. She won't be embarrassed by her past. She has proven that not only can she make magic from nothing, even when the castles that she built are repossessed, there is more magic in her left to rebuild them, and then some once again. In fact, it only makes her stronger. He's got my past frozen behind glass, but I've got me. Anyone, there's going to be a lot of speaking in Taylor Swift lyrics in this video, so I apologize to the casual fans if they have in fact tuned in. The success of the re-recordings endeavor and the support that's been thrown behind her by the industry and the public have breathed a new life into Taylor Swift's lyricism. Her hyperproductivity era is really good proof of that. She is bolder, she's less inclined to explain herself, and even less willing to make creative concessions than she ever was in the first place. Being the master of your domain means you get to decide what is normal, good, and new in a vacuum seal. This, of course, has its pluses and minuses. We get access to a Taylor Swift that is less diluted than ever on Tortured Poets. She moves only to the beat of her own drum, following her instincts, feeling her way through the dark quickly and with no fear. Essentially, we're getting pages from her diary. They have not been workshopped to death. There was no time to proof for errors before the copy went to the printing press. So, in that sense, this work, and I'm speaking specifically about Tortured Poets, is the most unvarnished glimpse we've had at her process and her psyche in a very, very long time. Reputation and Lover were overproduced, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way for Reputation, and Folk Evermore was a very careful repositioning. Midnight's, I'll get her ass later. Now, the downside of this approach is what critics picked up on in their cursory survey of the land on Tortured Poets. There is just too much of it, everywhere, all at once. And a lot of it seems familiar at first glance. There are no brand new attractions here, just fine details meticulously painted and filled in that only become visible when you spend a great amount of time looking. This creative approach would never yield a record that could be understood in a few days or even a few weeks. It needed to marinate and then to simmer. I feel like I'm only starting to get the shape of it now, 6 months after, and I've been listening to it pretty much every day since it came out. Now, that doesn't mean that the record is perfect. Tortured Poets is the most Taylor Swift record. So while it encompasses her many strengths, diaristic confessionalism, a detailed account of her circumstances, withering assessments of the men who cross her, it also displays mighty flaws, namely the haste and the myopia. When you feel your way through the dark and you write your journals in there, then then immediately send that copy to print, you lose a critical sense of distance, a remove from what you're doing that allows you to see it with a fresh gaze, editing it through distance eyes that can sense where to pare back or lean in, when to make cuts or when to let it rip. I'd like to point to my favorite writer, Joan Didion's writing process here to describe what I think Taylor might have lost in her hyper-productivity era. Here's how Joan Didion wrote and edited her work. She spends most of her day at the start sitting there thinking about what's going to appear at her desk. Then she gets down to the actual writing part, and the day winds down with a self-edit. This is a crucial part of any writer's process and often what molds excellence from potential. This is the benefit of having that sense of remove. Here's how Joan Didion describes this in her own words. I need an hour alone before dinner with a drink to go over what I've done that day. I can't do it late in the afternoon because I'm too close to it. Also, the drink helps. It removes me from the pages. So I spend this hour taking things out and putting other things in. Then I start the next day by redoing all of what I did the day before, following those evening notes. When I'm really working, I don't like to go out or have anybody to dinner because then I lose the hour. If I don't have the hour and I start the next day with some bad pages and nowhere to go, I'm in low spirits. Another thing I need to do when I'm near the end of the process is sleep in the same room with the work. Somehow the work doesn't leave you when you're asleep right next to it. So in my opinion, this process of giving it an hour prevents you from lingering in uninteresting corners, which is something that Taylor did too much of, particularly on the anthology. Do you see Didion's embrace of both closeness and remove here? She needs the drink to take a step back. She also sleeps in the same room as her work to avoid losing touch with it. Her mind needs to be still. She can't have too many people around, adding peripheral noise to what she's creating. There is a purity in isolation. Many writers are superstitious about others reading drafts or works in progress before they're done. Of course, this doesn't really hold up as well when it comes to pop songwriting, which is very often a collaborative, spontaneous, and or sporadic process. Writing sessions don't just materialize out of the blue. You got to organize, you got to get people together. But I do think that Taylor is very capable of being alone with her work, even after it's been worked on by other people, and trusting her own instincts. But like any good writer, she needs time and the hour to do this. A lot of Tortured Poets' noise comes from the circumstances of its creation. It was by and large recorded haphazardly through the busiest time of her life, performing a mammoth show that would challenge even the most experienced performer, doing all the other normal things a pop star does, while simultaneously falling in and out of love with a man who had no business having access to her precious energy at this crucial moment in her life. The resulting work is a catharsis for sure. Tortured Poets has all the marks and scars of a battered heart. You get the sense, however, that by the end of creating it, she was only just coming back to herself. She was surrounded by people, events, and demands that extended beyond the luxury of having that hour in the evening to sit and think about things and make your notes. She didn't have to release Tortured Poets during the Eras tour, though. She could have waited. She could have sat on the songs for a while. She could have taken that hour. She could have fine-tuned them. I know if she had more distance from it, there would be omissions for sure. But I think that that was the entire point of creating this, because she could. She had the flexibility, the cultural cachet, and the power to summon this when it made the least sense and when it could almost threaten to destabilize her entire project by being too much or leaning too heavily into the most potent version of herself, often while leaning into the parts of herself that critics have long since picked apart. If Taylor had edited it, if she had had the drink and the distance, if she slept in the same room with it, it wouldn't be Tortured Poets anymore. This record is something that had to come out when it did, in the exact form that it arrived. While creating it, she said that she had needed songwriting more than ever before. Listen to her. That should give you an indication of just how intimate the subject matter is. This is a serious statement coming from our most preeminent journalist of lost love. And this is why I circle back to comparing Tortured Poets with Red, famously my favorite Taylor Swift album, and also her critical darling, probably the most acclaimed Taylor Swift album, especially with the advent of the Taylor's version. These records are very similar in the sense that they are an inventory of heartbreak, a detailed collection of the various stages of the unique sort of derangement that comes from being torn away from someone that you love. Tortured Poets even goes a step further than Red, as I mentioned, entering into the territory of imagining the whole affair before it even began. It's like a bird's eye view of heartbreak, as well as an up-close shot of it. If Treacherous from Red is a whisper from the second before you fall in love, Guilty as Sin on Tortured Poets is a lucid dream about being in love, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot of it, with an idea of sorts for years on end before you ever even pulled the trigger. Tortured Poets is harder and more jagged than Red. Red was remarkable because it announced Taylor Swift's womanhood. It was, in my opinion, the real shift from girlhood to something else for her. We were not dealing with clear-cut hurts and betrayals or fairy tale stories with neat and tidy endings. Red lived firmly in the negative space between right and wrong, that pivotal gray area of growing up. It was also created back in a time when Taylor thought she very clearly knew what love could or couldn't be. Love is a ruthless game unless you play it good and right, she cautions on the opening track, State of Grace. Tortured Poets asks us a question instead of telling us a truism. Love is a ruthless game. Is there any point in playing it good and right? Can anyone do it? Divas, I'm so excited about today's sponsor because I have the deal of the century for you. We all know that the Eras Tour is making its way back to these United States with the Torture Poets department included, and I have the hookup from SeatGeek. If you're scheming on how to attend the Eras Tour, using the code Swiftologist100 will get you $100 off any Taylor Swift tickets. Yes, you heard me right. That's $100 off tickets to see Taylor Swift with the code Swiftologist100. And if you're not looking to see Taylor, we didn't forget about you. Me and SeatGeek, we're thinking things up. Use the code Swiftologist10 and get 10% off up to $25 for any tickets on SeatGeek, whether you're a new customer or not. Billy's on tour, Sabrina's on tour, Charlie's on tour, Gracie's on tour. SeatGeek helpfully rates each ticket on a scale of 1 to 10, so look for the green dots when you're browsing around. Green is good and red is bad. And what are you waiting for, Swifties? Seize the day. Go to the Eras Tour. Get your phone out and add the code Swiftologist100 and Swiftologist10 to your account. And thank you again so much to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video and giving me this awesome hookup to share with you. Red is imbued with the naivete that only comes from being young. I have the rest of my life to figure out what real love is, but in this very moment, it seems like I've lost it and I'll never recover from that. While reflecting on Red in an interview with Jimmy Fallon when she was re-releasing it, she revealed just how sad she was while promoting it. That hurt lingered in her for a very, very long time, but then it passed and a wiser version of herself emerged. Let's do a little thought experiment though. What would happen if, for example, she went through all of that again and realized through that tumult that she had learned nothing, and also realized just how much time she didn't have left to waste? This is where we meet our narrator on Tortured Poets. She is more or less the same girl who walked around promoting Red with a broken heart. She is reeling, fresh from the wound of a different kind of heartbreak, a compounded dissolution, years in the making. There was no age difference to consider here, no real extenuating circumstances like exorbitant media pressure. She had already been through that numerous times, so it wasn't a new experience for her. What makes Tortured Poets more stark and disconcerting is that she found only herself to blame for falling for the kind of ruse that Reputation, Lover, or Folklore's Taylor Swift had squarely moved on from in pursuit of something safe and comfortable. Although her antagonist on Tortured Poets department, Matty Healy, may have been the smallest man who ever lived, a con man who sold a fool a get-love-quick scheme, Taylor very willingly chose to enter the period of temporary insanity with him. She ignored her better judgment. All those lessons that she learned, cataloged, and shared with her listeners over the years went right out the window. It was like she was under a spell, or as she suggests in Down Bad, that she had been abducted to another planet that was so beautiful you could never believe it existed, even when she told you all about it. Love can be everything. Love can be your whole world, but as Taylor discovered, it can also be incredibly isolating, and little did she know, once again, destabilizing. I'll return to my Red and Tortured Poets are sisters argument later on, but for now, I want to turn my knife towards Midnight's. We really should have listened more clearly to its concluding track, Dear Reader. Never take advice from someone who's falling apart. You should find another guiding light, but I shine so bright. What I always find so compelling about Taylor Swift as a narrator is that she knows herself so well. Her ability to intuit what she's feeling is a real skill, and the fact that she knows this only through writing about it and sharing that work with the world is our gift to receive. If you pay even a little bit of attention, Tortured Poets answers a lot of questions that were raised on Midnight's and throughout her discography, and also raises new questions too. It's kind of amazing how much of Tortured Poets is foreshadowed on Dear Reader. Burn all the files, desert all your past lives, and if you don't recognize yourself, that means you did it right. Is that not exactly what she did in that interim period between Joe and Maddie, of which there was most probably overlap, if not physically, then at least in her wildest dreams? She abandoned all the best practices of being a good pop star to date Matty Healy. It didn't make sense for that interlude to happen. A good pop star, in her estimation, and by the new rules that she had established with her relationship to the public eye, post-Reputation, would not immediately flaunt her new boyfriend, especially not one as controversial as Matty Healy, in the wake of massive criticism and moral outrage. Taylor spoke lucidly and forcefully in Miss Americana and on many of her songs on Reputation and Lover about the fragility of a relationship that was even peripherally exposed to the public eye. She had begun to view attention and visibility as a romantic cancer. This happened as early as 1989. We hear it on I Know Places. They are the hunters, we are the foxes, and we run. It seems contradictory that the most visible person in the world, basically a neon billboard, should be able to or even want to hide. But for a period of time, she did, or at least someone else's perspective of the magnitude of her life encouraged her to hide. As she says in So Long London, you swore that you loved me, but where were the clues? I died on the altar waiting for the proof. You sacrificed us to the gods of your bluest days. She describes her relationship with Joe as a sinking ship that she held onto until the bitter end, flinging herself into the waves when she realized that in an emotional sense, this was do or die. Just how long did you think I'd go before I'd self-implode, she asked. And self-implode she did. Taylor had to basically relearn her life after this relationship relationship and herself without this weight saddled to her. When the spell lifted, she was bleary-eyed in a new world. I think we've skipped over too quickly just how much that relationship hindered her from truly being herself or being in touch with what she wanted. It is described at various points on this record as labor and jail. She had to basically sing in code for an extended period of time just to keep up her end of the privacy bargain. And this is where Tortured Poets starts. She's surveying the wreckage of everything that she thought she knew. She's trying to come back to herself. And she does meet an earlier version of herself in the wreckage, albeit a version she probably should have left behind. Red. And I think through creating Tortured Poets, she finally, at least for now, laid this version of herself to rest. I will concede that to really grasp and get this record, you have to care at least a little bit about the emotional journey on display. You'll get the most out of it by viewing it as a text that can be compared to other texts. Why must every pop record be able to stand completely on its own, devoid of the context in which it arrived? These are not coconuts. It seems like these days, if something isn't a completely different offering to what an artist we know has already released, it is somehow a regression. And I push back on that because I think there is as much merit in fine-tuning and polishing as there is in burning it down and starting over. And let's be honest for a second, Taylor Swift has burned it down and started over more times than any other artist can count, basically with her distinct focus on being an era's artist. Tortured Poets is a departure in and of itself because it's part of the all-encompassing era's era. Tortured Poets cannot be understood without the context of its creation. To me, that makes it a almost singular record in her discography. If you put this one in the Alien Time Capsule, they'd be like, oh, girls, what is she talking about? So walk with me here. Isn't Tortured Poets kind of the ultimate display of agency, making something and having it be a blockbuster without needing to pander and cater to every person who might encounter it, without worrying about what Sally Ann at the grocery store is going to think of this particular hook? In today's video, we're going to go deep on Tortured Poets. I want to talk about all the ways in which this record has advanced the Taylor Swift project and solidified itself as a creative feat within the context of her discography. I'll also, as I mentioned, compare it to Red at various points throughout this video to highlight her growth as a songwriter. Firstly, let's talk about character development, or lack thereof. Taylor is a multifaceted individual, and here I'm talking specifically about the character that we see on the page in the lyrics on this record. I want to clarify that I am not speculating about Taylor Swift the person. I don't know her. This is Taylor Swift the character, who she chooses to reveal to us. The benefit and the drawback of writing your songs rather dogmatically as a pop star is that, as I said earlier, you are the domain master. You are the one who decides how you appear on the page. And when you add fame into the equation, and the degree to which Taylor's music specifically is picked apart for sport, one might understand her impulse to, like she did on Midnights, be guarded, to remain strategically vulnerable, and to show only what portrays you in a positive light. So it's kind of radical and punk rock to keep exposing yourself anyway when you are up against this level of scrutiny. Sure, there are crucial bits of context missing all the way through this record, but we come away from this record with a picture of Taylor Swift that is more confusing than the picture we had of her before listening to it, and certainly very far away from the robotic, powerful Barbie we've been seeing stomp around on the Eras Tour stage for the last year and a half. It is kind of a myth-shattering record. A criticism long levied at Taylor is that none of her antagonists are there to defend themselves. I heard that coming up over and over again with Tortured Poets, and I have never found this line of argument to be very interesting. Let me tell you why. Because I think a central tenet of any good writing and good art is one's right to create an emotional truth. Edouard Louis, a prolific French writer who has chronicled his journey from the French working class to the literary elite through autofiction, has long said that the emotional truth is more important than facts. My perception of how he applies this to his work is that he believes how a story is structured and presented can actually reveal a deeper, more universal truth than a strict recounting of facts. And that's exactly what's taking place on Tortured Poets. We're not receiving a timeline, we're feeling our way through the cave in the dark, with our narrator as the guide as she lays out the rope. This might seem like a ridiculous comparison given that Edouard Louis was talking about the erosion of the French working class and Taylor Swift's opining about how Maddie Healy drove her crazy, but he said something in an interview I read the other day, because I've been kind of getting into his work a little bit lately, that really reminded me of Taylor. And he said, the more local something is, the more it speaks to the entire world. And he was asked whether he worries that the process of translation, when he's translating his works from French to English or other languages, he was asked if that process would dilute his work, given that so much of the vernacular he writes with is very specifically French. It can't really be translated properly. And I thought his answer was quite revealing. He said that having such a local or specific understanding of the emotion you're trying to convey is what moves people. It's those little details, the inflections inflections that his characters use, the slang they deploy or avoid that resonate far and wide, even through translation. He says, when you try to do something general, you won't touch anyone. And that is exactly what Tortured Poets is as a mission statement. Tortured Poets can feel rambling and incoherent when you try to itemize it by a timeline of what actually happened, or when you try to force it into what we've come to expect from Taylor as a general era. So many avenues are opened up in that process. Was there overlap with her prior relationship? Who initiated the reconnection? What happened in the past? But the more that you submerge yourself in the material, you start to realize that the particulars, the details, don't actually matter. And that's ironic, given how granular Taylor is on this record, telling us how her antagonist ate 7 bars of chocolate and then declared Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist. He sent her downtown lights. He imagined him coming home drunk from kissing someone named Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus as a hologram. It seems to me that this was read on a first listen by many people as confusing or unnecessarily detailed. There was certainly some editing that could have been done in these moments, but I think overall, these little particular details that seem so unique and specific are what transforms the personal into the universal. I view many of these little details as portholes into a feeling, a larger feeling. Sure, I might not have all the information behind who Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus are, but the image of her lover with his hands in the hair of someone else is the catalyst for a rather profound moment of reflection on the anthology, a much derided accompaniment to the Tortured Poets department. This song seems to have slipped through the radar of every reviewer and most of the fans as well. It's one of the few songs from Tortured Poets not to have cracked 100 million streams on Spotify, but it contains an entire universe within it, and also the most straightforward explanation of what happened between her and Maddie Healy. This song is about the melancholy of stress testing the idea of something that you had in your head, a dream if you will, and realizing that it is not compatible with your real life. What I sense on this song is a gulf between our narrator and the antagonist. Each of them had entered into this relationship looking for something else. Taylor is still reeling from the coward who claims he was a lion's deceptive conduct, and much of the verses here contain this sort of resigned disappointment at his inaction. She writes, as the decade would play us for fools and you saw my bones out with somebody new who looked like he would have believed you in school, you just watched it happen. Then she tells us very plainly how he unraveled her and triggered the temporary insanity. If you want to break my cold, cold heart, just say I loved you the way that you were. If you want to tear my world apart, then just say you've always wondered. So much of this record is Taylor hypothesizing about what this affair would be, all the delayed joy and gratification of what it might bring back to her life, a life that had increasingly felt anesthetized by how alone she felt in her prior relationship. But the reality of this affair, however, left her feeling more hollow than ever. She describes it very clearly in the final verse. So if I sell my apartment and you have some kids with an internet starlet, will that make your memory fade from the scarlet maroon, like it never happened? Could it be enough to just float in your orbit? Can we watch our phantoms like watching wild horses? Cooler in theory, but not if you force it to be. It just didn't happen. What she's describing here is a very grown-up kind of hurt, the kind of hurt that you can only experience once you've had a few notches on your bedpost, and you've had the realization that you actually don't just have endless years to figure it out and find the one. She pulled the parachute out of her last relationship and crashed anyway. This hurt also isn't even really about Maddie Healy, the antagonist. Yes, she felt duped. Yes, he was a liar. But also she implicates herself. At the end, she lets out a devastating, broken last line. As I wonder, will I always wonder? The pain of wondering. Girl, this is not just a right now kind of wound. It is a scar. The relationship may be over, but the damage will linger and linger and linger because it revealed something to this narrator about herself that she had not wanted to see. She cannot control her universe. Sure, she can rewrite the history by presenting situations and songs in a certain way, but despite all the force that she has in her life, she is not powerful enough to make someone that she loves love her back. And is that not the most universal feeling ever? We have a million colloquialisms to describe this phenomenon. Right place, wrong time, ships passing in the night, the one that got away. Good writing is being able to say something that everyone knows, a universal truth, in a new way. That's effectively rendered here by the specific details. Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, if you have some kids with an internet starlet, those little specificities that are awkward and unrelatable make the song feel real. And they also pull the parasocial triggers by making you feel more connected to the narrator, like you're seeing it through her eyes, not just hearing about it. And speaking of detail, there's an Easter egg woven in here too. Will that make your memory fade from this scarlet maroon? One of the most perplexing but intriguing songs on Midnights was a song called Maroon. It's another melancholic, wistfully nostalgic song about loss, clearly written while she was ruminating over the life she might have had with this specific antagonist before they had gotten together. In that song, she says, I wake with your memory over me. That's a real effing legacy to leave. Indeed. And by mentioning Maroon in Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, this is where I really think we're doing Taylor Swift Final Boss level 1000. She's not only revealing the entire story of tortured poets in a song buried unassumingly under a confusing title on the anthology, she's also linking it back to a mystery that plagued her fans on the first record. There was much ado about who those songs were about, given that she told us as a clue they were from different points in her life. Maroon was one of those songs that we could just not come to a consensus on before Tortured Poets came out. So, the myth making that she's doing here, the texture and the color she's adding back into the work that came before it while creating Tortured Poets is pretty remarkable. And as you can see, there are like a million different things going on at once on this song, which is why I reject the statement that Taylor's penmanship is in a state of decline. I will concede that there is a quality control issue, and I will get to some of that later on, but before we go there, I want to linger on more of this intertextual, hyper-specific lyricism that can only be accomplished by Taylor Swift, whose mythology is well constructed. Let's turn our attention to two real divas on Tortured Poets, songs that I think breathe new life into Taylor's collaborations with Jack Antonoff, which are so often criticized as samey or boring, Guilty as Sin and Fresh Out the Slammer. Let's start with Guilty as Sin. This is the prelude to Tortured Poets, the ruminating dream that led to the period of temporary insanity. I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the first songs written for the record. This song is sisters with So Long London, in the sense that So Long London describes the action of the dissolution of her relationship with Joe, but Guilty as Sin reveals something else to us, just how early she had checked out before she actually left, and how early the antagonist entered the picture. It wasn't just that he pursued her or turned her into an idea of sorts. She had done the same thing to him. Sometimes when you're really going through it, the old saying of the grass is always greener really starts to ring true. Midnight's had Taylor combing through the nights of her life while trying to avoid the particulars of her present, and I think it definitely led to Guilty as Sin. I view this really as the bridge between Midnight's and Tortured Poets, the literal growth moment. The song immediately opens with a detail. Drowning in the blue Nile, he sent me downtown lights. Now, this has the dual effect of being an Easter egg and an atmospheric scene setter. Drowning in the blue Nile, gorgeous. Downtown lights, we're getting the picture of someone who is up past their bedtime. Maybe she's had a few drinks, wondering about things. There's also literally referencing a song here, Downtown Lights by the Blue Nile. This is a longing song, if you've ever heard of it. It's an emotional questioning. The singer asks about his relationship in the song, how do I know you feel it? We know that Taylor was in a similar situation with Joe at the time. You swore that you loved me, but where were the goddamn clues, as she says in So Long London. And we also know that she had been holding her feelings in, whether that was in the intentional obfuscation of Evermore and Folklore, or the line, my face was gray, but you wouldn't admit that we were sick and you're losing me. She finds herself in this trap, or in a pen, as she describes it in Dear Reader, wondering on Guilty as Sin, am I allowed to cry? I have so much pent-up anguish inside of me that I'm afraid if I shed one tear, the whole dam will break. She says, I dream of cracking locks, throwing my life to the wolves, or the ocean rocks, crashing into him tonight. He's a paradox. I'm seeing visions. Am I bad or mad? Or wise? She's mulling over her options here. I can stay where I am, locked in this cage. That might be the right thing to do. That's what everybody wants me to do. But I'm feeling this pull to someone I know I shouldn't let back into my life. But the temptation to just feel something after all these years of holding back is clouding my ability to make a good decision. Can I convince myself in this dreamlike state that this vision may not be a vision of madness? Perhaps could it be my destiny? And then she goes into a very verbose chorus full of melisma where she imagines the whole tryst with Maddie before she's even made the decision to leave Joe. And here again we get those strange, gorgeous, specific images and turns of phrase that conjure up the illicit affairs of it all. What if he's written mine on my upper thigh only in my mind? I keep recalling things we never did. Messy top lip kiss, how I long for our trysts. And she reminds us again that this is a fantasy. Without ever touching his skin, how can I be guilty as sin? Do you see the genius here? The layers that are being unfolded. She is trying to feel empathy for herself by asking, am I allowed to cry? Should I feel guilty even though I've been neglected for so long? Even though I haven't done anything yet? Why does it feel like I'm doing something wrong? Then we get an Easter egg in the second verse. I keep these longings locked in lowercase inside a vault. Now you'll need to go and watch my Maddie Healy timeline video to get the full timeline of like events that I've corroborated with information from the songs, but this really suggests to me that she was writing about Maddie all over Folklore and Evermore. I mean, these were two albums with all of their songs in lowercase, and we know the vault is a secret treasure trove of unwritten material that Taylor has. Do the math, girls, do the math. She goes into the idea of fate and inevitability again. This is something that comes up all throughout her discography, but a lot on Tortured Poets. It's kind of remarkable that although her tryst hasn't even happened yet, she knows that it's going to. If it's make-believe, she says, why does it feel like a vow that we'll both uphold somehow? Then in the bridge, she finally pushes away the hesitation of, am I allowed to do this? Should I feel guilty about it? And she gets in touch with her intuition. She says, What if I roll the stone away? What if I push away these feelings about someone else and I stay with the guy that I've told everyone I'm going to love forever? They're going to crucify me anyway. Well, yes, no matter what you do, it's a lose-lose. Now, the next few lines are very interesting and revealing because this to me is Taylor's real homecoming to the Red version of herself, the more unguarded, hopeless romantic who will put herself in the line of fire just to feel something because she is the chronicler of heartbreak. Again, I think she compartmentalized that after she was lambasted for it during the record cycle for Red and also when she met Joe and had to exist almost entirely in secret with him. She says, "If long-suffering propriety is what they want from me, they don't know how you've haunted me so stunningly. I choose you and me religiously." This to me really reminds me of a line in But Daddy, I Love Him, another highlight that we will get to shortly. "God save the most judgmental freaks who say they want what's best for me. How foolish of them to think that their expectations could change the beat of my heart when he touches me and counteract the chemistry and undo the destiny." I love this. Unhinged Taylor is my favorite, and this is a very subtle and defiant unhinging that I think many missed on the first go around, but not me. Never me. She's saying, listen, I know I've portrayed to all of you that it's over now. I went through my tribulations. I got my happily ever after. But what you don't know is that I contain multitudes. And sometimes my desire for passion and excitement overrides my sensibility. And I don't really need to explain that to you. And yet, by virtue of existing, Tortured Poets reminds us that she's an agent of chaos when she wants to be. And what you see is never what you get. Mysterious Queen. I also think that aside from the lyrics, this song is really gorgeously written. It has a funky vocal tempo and a really nice instrumental. We have the live instruments back in the chat. Okay, now let's visit the sequel to Guilty as Sin, Fresh Out the Slammer. This song is the answer to Am I Allowed to Cry? Yes, you are allowed to cry. You are allowed to move on. You are allowed to be free and do what makes you feel good. To me, this song is like the feeling of stepping into a bright day after being in the movie theater for a really long time. It takes a second for your vision to like adjust back to normal life, and it's a little bit shocking at first. You're kind of taken out of your body for a while and then plunged back into it in a really confrontational way. First of all, with Fresh Out the Slammer, mouth kiss Jack Antonoff, one of the best instrumentals of his career. This is one of those songs that is made so much better by the production. I would love to know if this was written to track or not. It contains some country DNA, and I love how Jack tends to work that into his pop production with Taylor whenever he can. It's a nice little callback and homage to her history, but this sultry, sweltering, humid instrumental really matches the song's Western saloon vibe. I picture the song taking place in Florida. She's literally been incarcerated for years, writing love letters to her long-lost sweetheart, and after she gets out unexpectedly, she is given one call. She's got no money in her pockets and nothing going for her but this free call. It's the most important call she's ever going to make for the direction of her life going forward after prison. And who does she call? Our antagonist, but of course, Guilty as Sin is like the love letter that's written from prison, and Fresh Out the Slammer is the first call as a free woman. This song is incredibly sensual. You can hear the pent-up sexual tension and energy here, especially in her vocal delivery, which is a very unusual one for her in her career. It oscillates between her lower register and falsetto, and she's also giving us a lot of information in these lyrics, confirming things that we suspected from Midnight's. Splintered back in winter. We know that You're Losing Me was written in November. Silent Dinners, Bitter. He was with her in dreams. I founded the club she's heard great things about. Hello, anyone? One of my favorite things here is how she describes the feeling of wasting 8 years of her life, as she said in her Time magazine interview from 2023. She renders this as handcuffed to the spell I was under for just 1 hour of sunshine. Can't you just envisage an inmate here as well? The whole conceit of Fresh Out the Slammer is so well rendered. I can't. Years of labor, locks, and ceilings in the shade of how he was feeling. Girls, his Cascade Ocean Wave blues ruled the goddamn roost. She was so beholden to his whims that she had to ask herself, am I allowed to cry even? And then she says, all those nights you kept me going, swirled you into all of my poems. Now we're at the starting line. I did my time. That's like 2 Easter eggs in one line. First of all, these longings are locked in lowercase inside the vault. Well, Folklore and Evermore, swirled you into all my poems, do the math. Then we get to Now We're at the Starting Line, an intertextual reference to the song mentioned on The Black Dog. And she says, I did my time. And it's like, so true, Queen. You literally did do your years of labor, and now it's time to act crazy. There is such a sadness to the last line in Fresh Out the Slammer. It's gonna be all right. I did my time. The song ends kind of ominously and in a foreboding way. It's like, yes, girly, you did your time, but this will not be all right. This song is treacherous, but she did not realize it when she wrote it. Guilty as Sin and Fresh Out the Slammer are like songs that were also, I think, written in real time, chronicling the relationship as it developed, which is what I love about them. I would like to take a moment and unpack what I think is a unique accomplishment on this album, and probably one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs ever, and maybe the most polarizing or unrelatable song on this record, But Daddy, I Love Him. Why do I love this song so much, and what makes it the best written song on Tortured Poets? Well, it embodies the extreme remedies of this record that make it what it is. It is unapologetic insider baseball. It's rambunctious, structurally all over the place. It contains imagery that harkens back to the very beginning of her career, and it reckons with her public image in a completely new way. Buckle in, because this is going to take a while. But Daddy I Love Him is a middle finger to the haters and losers. But the haters and losers in this scenario are the Swifties, who started a movement to try and get Taylor to break up with the antagonist of this record, Maddie Healy. What I love about this song is how defiant she is. This is the Taylor Swift that I know and stan. Stubborn and willful, a force to be reckoned with, ready to throw all reason out the window to follow her beaten, battered, broken heart. Don't get me wrong, this song is completely ridiculous. It is absurd. For a woman in her 30s to title a song, But Daddy I Love Him, is very unserious. It really has that Bonnie and Clyde energy that I think is so rare to find in her song these days, as she has become more guarded over the years. But again, Tortured Poets is a return to giving it all up, strategically, of course. She takes aim at her onlookers here, the Sarahs and Hannahs in their Sunday best, clutching their pearls and sighing, what a mess, and all the wine moms who are still holding out. She literally says, F you, it's over. She's kind of taking aim at more than just the specific group of like speak up now, break up with Maddie people. This is a song against parasocialism, rendered very gracefully and thick with metaphor so as not to alienate her real fans, aka the people who engage with her relationship lore in whatever way she would prefer and not in this demonic, obsessive, controlling manner. One thing Taylor hates more than anything else in the world is being told what to do. She wants to be in control, and boy, she'll do anything to get it. I think at times in the past, Taylor has made concessions to the public in her personal life. A big part of the reason why I think her connection with Maddie was not explored in the Maroon era that she sings of is because her image was still too clean and very much about being a single girl boss at the time to get involved with a known addict and general rabble-rouser like Maddie Healy. We hear this in the first verse of But Daddy I Love Him. Too high a horse for a simple girl to rise above it. They slammed the door on my whole world, the one thing I wanted. The chorus itself is a goddamn troll. She wrote it with like reaction videos in mind, basically. The image of her running with her dress unbuttoned, screaming, But Daddy I Love Him, is so classically Taylor. It really reminds me of Love Story. I was crying on the staircase, begging you, please don't go. I'm having his baby. No, I'm not, but you should see your faces. She's lifting the veil of, I'm singing about my life and you're in it with me. And instead she's going, I share what I want to share with you. And don't you ever forget that. And you will never know all of it. And I can stop sharing it with you whenever I like. So watch your back, basically. And also, the way that you react to whatever I share will never get me down again, because I know that you don't even really have good intentions for me. You view my life as a sport, and it's not a sport, it's my real life. I love the first part of the second verse so much. Dutiful daughter, all my plans were laid, tendrils tucked into a woven braid. Growing up precocious sometimes means not growing up at all. Now, this is about her good girl shtick. We've talked about this at length on Evolution of a Snake, but Taylor really tried very hard to be a good girl through most of her early career. She said and did the right things. Her life was carefully planned out months in advance. It was all going according to plan and had been this way since she was a preteen. Though stardom may have been predestined for her, that doesn't mean that it came easily. There are things that you have to give up to get as big as Taylor Swift. And one of those things that you have to give up is privacy. She's also saying here, you know, I grew up as an ingenue and everyone was kind of gassing me up. And that kind of stunted me. That's why I'm screaming, But Daddy I Love Him in my 30s. The antagonist here, who she's mentioning, the one who's crazy but is the one she'd love, was chaos and revelry. He represented the rejection of all that planning and constraint and restraint that she grew up with. He was, for a brief moment in time, her escape route, her getaway car, if you will. The bridge is where she really starts spitting and doing something she's never done in her career, telling her fans directly to back off. I'll tell you something right now, she yells. I'd rather burn my whole life down than listen to one more second of all of this and moaning. I'll tell you something about my good name. It's mine alone to disgrace. I don't cater to all these vipers dressed in empath's clothing. I think we forget now, because it's been over for a while, how vile people were being about Taylor Swift during the Maddie Healy interlude, how even normal factions of the fandom were suddenly making Taylor Swift responsible for every dumb thing that Maddie Healy had ever said in his entire life. There were many think pieces written in journalistic outlets about how this was career suicide and the worst PR ever, and I love her really steadfast clapback here. She's saying, I built all of this up. I masterminded it. It was I who made you this interested in my love life. And it may have been my mistake to allow you to feel as though you had a say in it, but let me just set you straight before you get too out of pocket. I would literally rather have my life go up in flames than capitulate to the likes of you. I will not live my life based on how you want me to act as some paragon of virtue. I will decide for me what's best, and you can watch and be entertained, or shut up, or keep talking, but know that I see you for what you are, a viper dressed in empath's clothing. And then we get into this. God save the most judgmental creeps who say they want what's best for me, sanctimoniously performing soliloquies I'll never see, thinking it can change the beat of my heart when he touches me and counteract the chemistry and undo the destiny. God, that's one of my favorite bars in the entire Taylor Swift discography. It gets me every single time. I well up with tears when I hear it. Imagine thinking that you, plebeian, are strong enough with your boring ass creeds to change something as human and fragile and fundamental as the beat of Taylor Swift's heart. No matter what you say, Taylor Swift is an emotional being, and though she exercises great control and restraint in most areas of her life, romance is her life's work, and being in love is a craft that she is always learning, and you will never be able to take that away from her, no matter what you say. Shall we take a brief detour and look at some examples where detail and specificity aren't necessary per se? The benefit of feeling your way through the dark is that you come very close to your intuition, but again, as I've said before, you lose the critical distance. It's interesting how perspectives change over time. In my original video on Tortured Poets criticisms, I believe I pointed to the title track and Who's Afraid of Little Old Me as examples of the lacking quality control. And I definitely stand by what I said about Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. Specifically, I maintain that criticism, and if you want to hear it, you can go watch that video. But today, I am turning my knife at Fortnite. On a surface level, one might think, well, you've just said that detail and specificity are what create emotional truth, so isn't that a good thing? Well, yes, that is the case when the details and the specificity are rendered elegantly and with purpose. I'm not suggesting that overwrought songs can't be lyrically impressive and meaningful. I just went on a rant about But Daddy, I Love Him. But sometimes leaning too far into metaphor and imagery can actually be confusing. I'm ready to just speak on it. Fortnite is a nonsensical song. It's a high-level concept overview of Tortured Poets in general. It's about the passage of time, misconnections, etc., but what it's actually trying to say specifically or accomplish is a mystery. This song is incredibly detailed. She's basically describing being neighbors in some sort of Stepford universe or Don't Worry Darling land with her ex who is with someone else. She's plotting to kill him. There are some pretty lines here. I took the miracle move on drug. The effects were temporary. I love you. It's ruining my life. But the connection between the imagery here and the rest of the story on Tortured Poets is too unclear. Like, yes, we have that mental picture of you living next to your ex. We know it's not real, and we can see that you're slowly losing your mind, but to what end? What is the purpose of this song? What does it add to Tortured Poets that we don't get in more detail or in another font on other songs? Swifties will offer you a million different interpretations for the song, and I find that often the more math is done, the worse you know the song is because it leaves too much up to interpretation. The outro is pretty. Thought of calling you, but you won't pick up. Another fortnight lost in America. Buy the car you want, but it won't start up till I touch you. It's pretty. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. And I think this album's biggest disservice was that it had to undergo the Taylor Swift album rollout treatment. Taylor's album releases are momentous and occasional, and people really do expect Taylor to come with at least one big hit per album cycle. At least that's been the way it's gone so far. Midnight's played to that in a very obvious way, and I'd say it actually produced two stereotypical career smashes, Antihero and Karma. Tortured Poets was never going to have that same impact because by the nature of its too muchness, there are no songs on this record that slot very easily onto the radio or as a TikTok sound. So it's my opinion that Fortnite's creation and the inclusion of Post Malone was Taylor's, well, we need a single moment. Ordinarily, I'm okay with this strategy because usually her bait and switch album campaigns lead to a more protracted rollout that sheds light on what the album could be when it eventually comes out. For example, let's bring it back to Red. When We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together came out for Red, after Speak Now, that was a jarring proposition. Swifties were threatening to off themselves and light Taylor Swift on fire. But a few weeks later, Begin Again came out and we were so back. Then we got Red, I Knew You Were Trouble, and State of Grace, really giving the mainstream audience a proper taste of everything that was to come on Red. That's actually a really good sampler plate of everything that you can expect to experience on that record, rather than attaching all the momentum to the polarizing lead single. But because Taylor's in her era, and also because just by her sheer size, whatever song she puts out is going to be a hit, there was only so much time to create marketing materials for this record, and that included picking singles. I Can Do It With a Broken Heart is, in my opinion, a much better song and more fun and energetic while retaining the Tortured Poets thesis, which is, I'm going to split my veins and spill ink all over the table, and you will know exactly how I've been feeling while I've been up on that stage and having the time of my life. Spoiler alert, not well. There was an incredible opportunity for a music video here too. Fortnite is not able to accomplish that because it is simply too vague. I think the public would have better received I Can Do It With a Broken Heart as the first single and would have gotten a clearer picture of what the Tortured Poets department actually was. The title itself, by the way, is a bit of a stretch, but what else were we going to call it? Fortnite is a vibe song. I'll turn it on when I don't want to think about what to play, but it does not enhance the story of Tortured Poets, and being its sole sole representative for a while was definitely a big mistake. That's another disadvantage of creating really quickly. You don't get the time or the distance to consider the long game. I think Taylor's thought process was big feature with a popular streaming artist, vibes, black and white video, done, easy, hit, check. But if she had longer to dream it up, I think she would have led with I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, or maybe even Down Bad. So it is strange that Tortured Poets is a hitless album in that sense, and it's not hitless because each and every track has like outstreamed every other single and non-single track from other popular albums this year. But I don't think we'll be looking back on Fortnite as like the messiah of Tortured Poets. There are only two Taylor albums where I can't make a solid argument for how the lead single is the perfect ambassador for the record: Lover and Tortured Poets Department. Tortured Poets, that is not good company to be in. Get up on your good foot, Tortured Poets. If the standard edition of Tortured Poets is Red, then the anthology is Evermore. Why do I think this? Because they're both records with extremely high highs and very low lows. The quality control was not controlling here, but that also makes it a rather interesting document. Tortured Poets tells a pretty linear story from start to finish, but its concluding Clara Bow meditates on the churn of fame and life in the public eye as a woman in pop, and that's kind of the jumping off point for the anthology. The thing about a really bad breakup is that it seeps into every corner of your life. It reopens wounds that have nothing to do with your relationship or even your broken heart. A breakup makes you existential. It makes you question literally everything about yourself and your life. What's so compelling to me about the anthology is the way it oscillates between subjects. We have Taylor pondering over her legacy as a writer, telling a story about a girl who loves to run, singing to someone else's child, not her best detour, longing to be a normal person but knowing she'll never be one, wondering if she's doomed in love forever, the solace and survival that writing offers her, and her favorite subject, when Kim Kardashian beat me up. The anthology also kind of makes it clear to us that she's moved on from the heartbreak on Tortured Poets, and a new way that Taylor has developed to deal with scrutiny of her work is by saying, this was all in the past, I'm over it now. And I mean, she explicitly states this in the foreword. The anthology runs off into different areas, partly as a distraction, like a flare signal away from the real disaster site. And I have to think that it was purposely released to kind of soften the blow of the jaw-dropping insights into her psyche and decision-making process that we got on the standard edition of Tortured Poets. The anthology is not a separate body of work to Tortured Poets, and it should not be viewed as such. It's an expansion and a continuation. I think the theming of the first two tracks directly shows us this, and it's The Black Dog, which is a classic Taylor Swift pining song, complete with some beautiful production, and I'm Gonna Get You Back, which is another classic Taylor song, but of the psychotic variety. Personally, one of my favorites. Then we really get cooking into the Evermore world of it all. These are the anthology songs that I think could slot right into Evermore. The Albatross, How Did It End? I Hate It Here. The Prophecy, The Bolter, and The Manuscript. And I think the most obviously Evermore songs are The Albatross and The Bolter. Let's start with a little examination of The Albatross, shall we? She's likening herself in this song to a very large protective bird. She's speaking in the language of fables and fairy tales here. Cross your thoughtless heart, only liquor anoints you. She's the albatross, she is here to destroy you. It's a very elegant, plucky, folksy song where Taylor contends with her own myth-making by creating a myth about herself. Think about Taylor's public image. She is so often viewed as like a man-eater or a black widow or a kiss of death for the famous men that she courts. As soon as they start dating her, there is a national sport level of attention paid to her movements with them and endless speculation about when she will inevitably burn them and write mean songs about them. That pernicious myth is actually enough to have destroyed a few of her real-life relationships. When people repeat a fable often enough, it starts to become true. So she's playing with the idea of that fable here. She's poking its logic. She likens the public that warns her potential lovers about her as jackals who read fake news and come to drag the hero out of his bed by the feet, whether she was involved with him or not. She reframes the myth at the end, defying its own internal logic by swooping in as the albatross to protect and not destroy her suitor. I'm the life you chose, all this terrible danger. She doesn't fully deny that she may still be here to destroy him, but she shows that she can be tender too. This is high-level commentary on her public image, and it's the kind of reckoning with self that is interesting and not maudlin and trite or tedious like Cassandra or Thank You Amy, two songs on this record that explore approximately zero new territory and contain weak songwriting that can't even breathe a new life or melody into this uninteresting corner of the cave. We get another side of the albatross myth in The Bolter, where she sings with some detached remove about a girl who is nicknamed The Bolter. You might think she'd take a sad lens to this, the broken girl with trust issues who can't find love or stay in one place for too long, but instead she turns that on its head and delivers a rather feminist line. Hearts are hers for breaking. There's escape in escaping. Other people so often portray Taylor Swift as someone who is just waiting around to get her heart broken, filing her nails. In that picture, she has no agency, but here she reminds us that not every relationship of hers ended because she was rejected. Sometimes she runs, and sometimes running feels like freedom. Because Taylor's earlier works were so focused on the relatability, the diaristic confessional quality of her songwriting, there was very little space for her to get meta until she fully switched to pop music in 2014 with 1989. Red, the album preceding 1989, had a stark meta moment that was kept off of the original tracklist and revealed to us years later. Nothing New, where she reckons with the pressures of being an ingenue. new? How will I keep myself interesting, she wonders. When will they get tired of my tricks? The prophecy on Tortured Poets, to me, is like a many years later sequel to Nothing New. Because the fourth wall has been totally shattered at this point, she's freer than ever to opine in public about what fame has done or what it might do to her. In Nothing New, she was anxious about losing relevance. In the prophecy, it's depression about what she gave up for it. Okay, so 12 years later, I have successfully kept everyone interested in me. I have proven that I am, in fact, the blueprint. I gave that map away to the girl who said she wanted it. But what has this done to me? Elsewhere in Tortured Poets, we hear about Taylor's almost feral ambition and desire for fame and to keep ascending to new heights as an entertainer. On Clara Bow, for example, take the glory, give everything. It's hell on earth to be heavenly. On The Prophecy, that ambition has drained away. She whispers over a nervous guitar lick, "Thought I caught lightning in a bottle. Oh, but it's gone again. And it was written, I got cursed like Eve got bitten. Oh, was it punishment?" I am so obsessed with this song because I think it's deeply revealing and leans into this kind of spiritual, esoteric part of Taylor that rarely has the space to really come out and play. She's asking herself here, is this what I had to do to achieve my dreams? Sign a contract to be heartbroken for all eternity? Have the gods intervene with any happiness I might have and muck it all up so that I might fulfill my purpose as the heartbroken one of this world? In the chorus, she's literally begging to be released from this unfair trade. Please, I've been on my knees. Change the prophecy. I don't want money, just want someone who wants my company. Let it once be me. Who do I have to speak to about if they can redo the prophecy? And then we get into the gorgeous female rage of it all in the bridge. And again, it's all delivered in a very understated way. A greater woman stays cool, but I howl like a wolf at the moon. I look unstable, gathered with a coven round a sorcerer's table. A greater woman has faith, but even statues crumble if they're made to wait. Gorgeous! I'm so afraid I sealed my fate, she says. How is this not a step forward or an advancement in her lyricism? It's not a particularly wordy song either. It's not Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. It's a quiet, desperate little number buried towards the end of this record. More and more, I keep thinking that she has left the real tea for the real ones. It's not like this is some big secret, but it's truer every day that people don't have the wherewithal or the ability to sit down and process something. So I know for sure that the casual listeners missed a song like The Prophecy, and I haven't heard a single reviewer contend with it either. And you know what? Most of the reviewers just refused to contend with the anthology at all, simply because it was too long and it came out too soon and they were on deadlines. So you're lazy, but more food for me. I want to close my lyrical analysis of the best record ever created with its final track, The Manuscript. At first listen, this didn't click with me melodically, but it is the most gorgeous epilogue to this record and this chapter of Taylor's life. And it also really ties a neat bow on something that she's been doing throughout this period of time, revisiting her past, meeting that red version of herself again. The Eras era has had Taylor confront all the nooks and crannies of her prior selves. She talks about this a little bit in her Time magazine interview, where she says that she refuses to be ashamed of who she once was. And I think that this is a pretty radical idea for everyone, especially in this new world of cringe and our digital footprints that go on forever. It's really easy to be made to feel embarrassed of something. I am reminded in this song by another Joan Didion quote, "I think we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. Otherwise, they turn up unannounced and surprise us, come hammering on the mind's door at 4 a.m. of a bad night and demand to know who deserted them, who betrayed them, who is going to make amends. We forget all too soon the things we thought we could never forget. We forget the loves and the betrayals alike, forget what we whispered and what we screamed. We forget who we were." The entire Taylor Swift project is a project of remembering. No, it didn't happen like that. It meant more than what you've told me after the fact or what you've said about it. Here's a piece of the story you missed out. This is what I wanted to say but couldn't in the moment. I remember it all too damn well. I think this philosophy is rendered so beautifully in the manuscript, which is very specifically about laying an ancient hurt to rest. The girl we met on Red with her broken, battered heart, the girl who makes an appearance again on Tortured Poets and who Taylor says hello to, keeping on nodding terms with her so that the current Taylor can move forward. Think about the catharsis of re-recording the 10-minute version of All Too Well, an uncompromising recollection of something that happened to her. Having it go #1, performing it on SNL, being critically acclaimed all these years later, that is a healing that she earned with blood, sweat, and tears. At the beginning of the manuscript, this song, she lingers a little bit in what still bothers her from that scenario, because it is still, after all, rooted in pain. She thought about how he said since she was so wise beyond her years that everything had been above board, and she still wasn't sure about that. And she talks about how the years passed and how she learned that looking backwards might be the only way to move forward. This part really gives me chills every single time, because I think we've skipped over too quickly how much losing her life's work has wounded her, and how she felt that it spelled the end of her and all of her past selves for a while. The only way she was ever going to move beyond her past, frozen behind glass, was the looking back, re-recording all of these works, meeting with her past selves, and becoming on nodding terms with all of them once again. To become become who she is, she had to remember who she was. On the manuscript, she finds catharsis in seeing the actors act out the all too well scenes. And then she writes, and at last she knew what the agony had been for. And she closes out this entire chapter, this return to temporary insanity, by again revisiting her past and realizing now and then I reread the manuscript, but the story isn't mine anymore. That's the whole purpose of this project. I transform my pain so that you feel it too, and it strikes some things in you, and it gets it off my chest. Actually, you know what? We're not done. We're not done yet. We haven't excavated the song, which is truly the mission statement for Tortured Poets, but actually just serves as a calling card for Taylor Swift. As an artist, as a creative, as a person, I hate it here. Now, you may know that relatability is not a strong factor I take into consideration when evaluating Taylor Swift songs, but this one, coincidentally, also happens to hit close to home for me. If you're a writer or a dreamer, then you get it, but that has nothing to do with why it's one of the greatest songs on this record. This song explains what she said during the Eras tour, that she needed songwriting more than ever, in so much more detail. Weirdly, this was one of those songs that people picked to show that Tortured Poets was bad by taking one line in the second verse out of context. You can't do that with Tortured Poets. The context is everything, but either way, this song is about feeling alienated from the world and everyone around you, literally hating everything. But there is one solace that exists, a private oasis in the vault of your mind that only you can access, and no one can take that away from you. The lyric goes, I hate it here, so I will go to secret gardens in my mind. People need a key to get to, but the only one is mine. I read about it in a book when I was a precocious child. I'm there most of the year because I hate it here. There's a very direct link to her child self here. This song harkens back to a lot of folklore for me, specifically Seven and the Lake, which are both songs about the child's imagination and the yearning to run away and be alone with your creativity. Taylor's imagination, this world that she goes into when she writes, is a sacred flow state that cannot be taught, bought, or explained, and it's also what keeps her here with us. The second chorus expands on this idea and raises the stakes. I hate it here, so I will go to lunar valleys in my mind. When they found a better planet, only the gentle survived. I dreamed about it in the dark, the night I felt like I might die. In times of strife and trouble, when Taylor's at her absolute lowest, she saves all her romanticism for her inner life and gets lost on purpose when the world makes her feel worthless. The idea of Taylor's ability to write and create being the force that drives her project forward is exactly what does that. No matter what anyone tries to say or take away from Taylor Swift, her continued success is a testament to her unique strengths as a songwriter, as a dreamer, as a creative, as someone who hates it here and shares with us glimpses of those beautiful lunar valleys in her mind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was an episode that I just had live on camera. I don't know what I said. I don't know why I said it. I just know that it needed to come out, okay? The spirit of Tortured Poets called on me, and I was moved to share all of that with you. If you like this video, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think an underrated moment from Tortured Poets is. I would love to hear from you. And don't forget to fill out the poll and let us know where you would like to see Evolution of a Snake live in the United States in 2025. Goodbye, Swifties. I will see you next week.